What do you think of Hamann's critique of Kant? Because I know you quoted him.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
The Metacritique of the Purism of Reason and so on and so forth. Yeah, Hamann's wonderful. I mean, you know the story of that. I mean, Hamann and Kant were friends, and Kant had the highest esteem for Hamann. And
and
Hamann,
Kant
though,
kind of helped Hamann out a little bit. Like I think he
oh,
had
quite a
like a
lot. I mean, it's
son
a
or something.
very
Yeah,
impractical man. He was saintly, but also absolutely practically hapless. My friend John Betts wrote the best book about Hamann in English. Uh,
I read it. Yeah, I did. I did a little. I was trying to write a.
did you
I was
like it?
I loved it. I was trying to write for this musicology like class, something about song as like the marriage of heaven and earth. And I
Yeah.
was trying to bring in Hamann. And so like I read some Hamann and read his book, and it was way too philosophical for the class. No one had any idea what I was talking about. And I'm not even
As
sure.
long as you enjoyed it, that's okay. Yeah, no, I mean, but the thing is, what's wonderful about Hamann is, of course, he literally kind of like kidnapped the first version of the Critique of Pure Reason from the press, before it was ever published, and went off and wrote his critique. And it did. I mean, Kant took it very seriously. And boy, even Hegel felt he had to deal with Hamann, had to write. I mean, he
Really?
criticized him, but he took him very. And Hegel, in the one sense, approved of the historicizing of language and reason in Hamann, but in another way, obviously he sublated this into his, saying that, well, the finite still is, the infinite knowing itself in the finite, and so reason is not abjectly a servant of history, or is not just at the disposal of contingency. Not that Hamann said it was. I mean, but yeah, no, I think Hamann's critique of Kant still holds water now. As brilliant as Kant was, he never really, Hamann's critique was extraordinarily solvent. And it's a funny thing is, it's a critique that philosophers still have a very hard time absorbing. You find this in analytic philosophy, in the Anglophone world, is that in order for most analytic philosophy to work, whatever proposition you make you should be able to map onto a sort of abstract syntax, so that you can represent it as, X, Y, Y2, YPH, so the terms, in a sense, are secondary to syntactical relations of logic. And then you're doing this across time as if these terms have exactly the same meanings and no cultural context, and that you can use the same token. Like, my favorite was, I had a student once explaining very precisely and in in the most Fregean way he could, how Aristotle had blundered in his understanding of causality, and in a point, sort of kind of repeating in a much weaker form Schopenhauer's critique in the Fourfold Rules of Sufficient Reason. But what's funny about it is when at the end of his presentation, I had to explain to him, you realize that Aristotle didn't write in English, right? And he actually nowhere talks about causality at all, but he does talk about atia. Calls, or ATI in the plural, or atios plural if it's ation in the neuter. He uses both. But that I had to explain to him that this is not, Aristotle's etiology has nothing to do with the energetic exchange of forces that you think a cause is. And it's not a confusion of rationales and causes in the way Schopenhauer said it was. It's a very conscious understanding of there are rational relations, and therefore rationales that go up to making it up. And the point is that for analytic philosophy, a lot of it to work, it makes the same mistake of treating words and ideas as these timeless categories, and then there were timeless meanings, and then the meanings are secondary anyway to the syntactical logical relations. And Hamann would just explode that. I mean, I find it impossible. You read the Metacritique of the Purism of Reason, and it seems to me, it's like 9/10 of analytic philosophy falls along with the weaker parts of Kant.
Is Hamann reconcilable with like there's a lot of talk about Neoplatonism here lately, and there's like a rediscovery of sort of a relatively Neoplatonist metaphysic. Do you think
Not
Hamann
for
is
me. It's the one that's, yeah.
right? Is Hamann
Sure,
reconcilable with that? Because it's interesting.
sure.
Because like if someone came to me, they were like, "Ah, man, I'm doubting God and Christianity," I'd be like, "There's kind of two routes you can go:
Yeah,
Neoplatonism or
I can give
Hamann."
you the Pseudo-Dionysius, or I can give you Hamann. Yeah. Well, I believe that God is the coincidence of opposites. I'm a good Cusan, so I believe. Yeah, I mean, look, um, I believe that it really is the case that there are different modalities of understanding and discourse that are complementary, only complementary at the level of understanding of which we're capable, though we can see, at times only intuit, but often see how they complement, and that I do believe that ultimately do coincide in the truth. For me, Hamann was, I can love Hamann and love that sort of, saying something so outrageous as I just couldn't worship a god without genitals, and because he's trying to, or putting the head of a satyr on the cover of a book, just to shock Lutheran piety. Yet there was no one more pious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he wasn't a crude thinker. So he wanted to emphasize God as what the poet at the beginning of days and the critic at the end of days. But he understood that there was this unchanging nature to God too, this absolute goodness, this infinite love. All right, that if you're going to construe it metaphysically, would not, a sort of Neoplatonic way of phrasing it, seems to me perfectly compatible.
Mm.
Whether we can, in our imaginations, perfectly reconcile this very biblical God, the poet and the critic, and what sometimes strikes us, and it shouldn't, but sometimes strikes us as the kind of disembodied, austere, impersonal heavens of Neoplatonism. Okay, that's a lack of imagination on our part, because if God is the fullness of all being, then he's also the full actuality of such things as love and creativity and the arts. So it's the things that we want to say are excluded by apathia. No, they're excluded as a pathos, as something that qualifies or changes God, but their actuality has its still higher, more supereminent reality in him. So it seems to me, yeah, they're perfectly compatible at the logical and the metaphysical level. The place where it's hard to reconcile them is in imagination, because when we're on the one side, that's mythical, but this living, the God of Hamann on the one hand, that's where we want to be. And when we're, you know, floating through the Platonic heavens. But I'll remind you, even Plotinus talks about the heavenly realm as a place that's like infinite numbers of spirits with shining faces. It's a community. He doesn't. We read Plotinus and the Neoplatonists wrong if we think of it as just an escape from community or humanity or personality. That's not. That's just as inaccurate as saying that Hamann believes in an anthropomorphic, physical, embodied God, because he makes these outrageous statements.
Yeah, and it was surprising to me how much Hamann, some of his critiques they come before the postmodern critiques. Some of them are the same, like
Yeah.
his skepticism towards epistemology and his emphasis on like words being the same. This is in my mind related, although I don't know if it'll come out as related. Hello, everyone. Would you please consider supporting me on Patreon? I'm really enjoying making this podcast as a means of having interesting conversations with people in the arts and those who are interested in promoting beauty, especially in the liturgical arts. But I'm also doing this as a means of trying to help support my family. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting me on Patreon, it would mean the world to me. The first 20 people in the United States who sign up at any financial level, be that the $5 level or above, will get a free copy of my CD, Bach's Organ Mass, recorded on the Trost organ in Waltershausen. Thank you for your support.